how's it going? Welcome to Wander on the Way, a show that is an ode to hours spent in coffee shops, late night get-togethers with friends, walks outside, and long car rides. Basically, all the times and places we get a moment to slow down to be present with ourselves and those around us. My name is Josh Perry, and I'll be your companion today for a little while. Join me and my occasional guests as we take a look at all the messy little details of being human. And remember, you're not lost as long as you say you're wandering. Welcome everyone to episode 9 of Wander on the Way. I have another guest today, and I'm really excited about her. This is a good friend of mine who's helped provide me with some real solid scholarship on Confucianism and Taoism. Yeong Wang, or just Wang as you'll hear me call her, is a Korean Confucian philosopher. So today's episode is a little more on the academic side of things than other interviews. We're discussing a question whose answer has major implications for how we live our lives and organize our societies. Are humans fundamentally good? Before we begin, I just want to say that there are a few footnotes to the episode which I will share after the conversation, so if you'd like to get a little extra context, please listen all the way through to the end. This is a good moment also to plug my Patreon, where I post full, unedited audio from our conversations. I tried to keep today's episode trimmed to the most succinct and impactful moments, but there's nearly 30 minutes of conversation that did not make the final cut. Your support helps me to run the show, weekly events, and to provide some wisdom and coaching to my patrons. As you listen today, I want you to consider the many different ways you relate to the people around you. Think of the love and gratitude that you feel and express toward those closest to you, and ask yourself, are there little things that I can do to extend those sentiments and actions beyond my close bonds toward the acquaintances and strangers that I might meet on the street? Without further ado, let's get into today's episode. Well, hello, Wang. Thank you for joining me today. I'm really looking forward to our chat today. For those of you at home, this is a really good friend of mine and my wife, and she's been sort of training me and coaching me on some Eastern philosophy scholarship. I will step aside for a second, and Wang, would you please introduce yourself a little bit and let everybody know who you are and why you're here?
Oh, it's a great pleasure to be here. Especially talking with Josh, but a little bit more official, probably in the platform. My name is Yeong Wang. Yeong is my first name. Last name is Wang. Usually, I go with Wang with my friends. I am a philosopher specialized in East Asian and comparative philosophy. And more specifically, I am very fascinated about Confucian philosophy and feminist philosophy. So recently I'm from Korea, so I'm also drawing a lot of resources from my heritage too. So recently I'm doing a lot of work also from Korean Confucian philosophy and women philosophers.
Well, I'm really looking forward to this, but I'm also, probably for my sake, I know there are probably some differences between Korean Confucianism and Chinese Confucianism, and most of my exposure so far to Confucianism has been a few of the things that you've talked about, but mostly like in reading stuff from the Tao Te Ching, it seems like there's a lot of statements that feel kind of reactionary to Confucian philosophy, or somehow they're responding to it. So I've certainly got kind of a biased point of view here that I'm hoping you'll give some additional clarification and maybe some education about, why the Confucians are not the wrong ones here, because that's what I'm getting out of the Tao Te Ching anyway. We pre-selected a handful of chapters, so this has a little bit of different characteristic than some of the other interviews, and I have to say that Wang has trained me well by looking up a few of the passages, kind of preparing some stuff here, and we're both armed with copies of the Tao Te Ching by your advisor, right? Philip J. Ivanhoe, or your
my
mentor,
colleague
I guess.
now.
Colleague,
My co-translator, yes.
And this was, I think I mentioned this maybe even in an earlier episode of the podcast, but this was a gift that you gave me and has been a great addition to my shelf and things. So let's start off first of all with chapter 18, which was the first one I had sent you.
Yep.
So I handpicked these chapters because they were the ones that felt like the strongest kind of commentary on Confucian values, that at least as far as I could tell. And so this one had a particular line. It's actually the first line right at the top, which said, "When the great way is abandoned, there are benevolence and righteousness." So now I'm going to put you on the spot. You got to try to defend some Confucianism here, because the implication seems like they're trying to say, like, stop all of that stuff that you're kind of running around about and just get back to the way that we should be behaving.
Yeah. The thing is, when I reread, it's been quite a long time. So when you sent me these chapters, I reread, and my first reaction this time was, I don't think they really oppose. I mean, okay. I don't oppose. As a Confucian philosopher now here, I'm talking, and I don't think we are Confucianism and Taoism. This is definitely criticism, but it's not a binary opposition.
Okay.
So that's why, like, my reaction was, yes, I understand, where Lao Tzu is coming from, and then what are the points that he wanted to criticize. And I think also Confucius or Confucians would have recognized the criticisms, and I think we share the concerns of Lao Tzu. Yeah, so it's like I didn't feel in general, there's strong desire that I have to defend, in a sense. Okay. It's just so maybe I don't know if this is the correct way, but overall, the 3 chapters, then my reaction was just one line I found. Can I just bring it up?
Sure, go for
now? It. Yeah. I think maybe that's the best way how I approach this one. Okay. So there is another book, the Shiji, that's in English like a records of great historian. So written by the Sima Qian, by the Han Chinese. So later. So anyway, so the book records the conversation between Lao Tzu and Confucius. And there is a long story. And then at the end, someone asked, and then that also the records that, Lao Tzu criticized the Confucianism all this way. And towards the last end, that someone asked Confucius, so what do you think about this criticism?
Right.
And Confucius said, I don't know how to translate this one, but roughly saying, our ways are different. So we cannot either, it can be translated into 2. We cannot consult each other, or we cannot plan some important work to do together.
Okay. It's the ancient agree to disagree.
Yes. So the thing is, like, this was actually the reason I brought this up was this is the exact represent how Confucians, including myself, would react to the Taoist criticism. So I think maybe my impression was Taoist has quite brighter picture about the ancient time, but the Confucianism we also share. If you read other Confucian classics, like the Book of History or the things, yes, also we have the ancient time. We have a good a period of the sage kings. Everything you didn't have to say anything. It was beautiful. So we share that.
Yeah.
So I think that the chapter 18 shows some kind of also commonality, that the Tao way, the great way, was great. Yes. So I think that can be agreed between the Confucianism and Taoism, but Confucianism would say yes, but since then, human built culture,
Okay.
and that is also worse. But it seems like a Taoist is quite critical what human has built since then, and of course with right reasons.
Sure. Yeah, I think we've probably picked out a good couple of chapters for our discussion then, because later on, some of the other passages I'm hoping to talk about today, it seems like, I guess, like I can see a lot of that coming through, because a lot of Taoism, or the chapters in the Tao Te Ching, are referencing the ancients and the sages, and so that makes sense that there would be this common framework that maybe both schools of thought are looking back to historically. But I like also, in a weird way, when you're confronted with like, I'm going to make you defend Taoism. I feel like you sort of expose the still very Western attitude that like I'm coming into all of this with, because my first reaction is, upon reading this, is that there's a stark divide, or like between the two schools of thought. And it's not necessarily that way, right? There's a lot of commonality, and you're kind of looking at it from some different perspectives, but it's the same general issues. So I thought that was, just from my own revelation, kind of entertaining or amusing, that you're like, no, I'm not going to defend myself. And it's like, all right.
Yeah, I think that's one great point, because like also in my class, I tend to focus that, in Western culture, not everyone, but yeah, we here we are a little bit generalizing. But it's like when you have a kind of duality ideas, and then it seems like quite many people think, like quite natural, I think, also even for everyone actually. So is it this one? If it's not this, then it should be that.
Right.
Right? Yeah. But for East Asian idea, definitely I would say that it's more on the spectrum, I would say. So yes, we are here, from point A to B, but it's, this, path, the way, spectrum from A to B is not clear cut like a white, black or white.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right.
It's more just like, where you are, on this spectrum. So I think that's, it's a way easier to explain, how we think. Yeah.
Okay. So this actually, I think, leads me pretty nicely into talking a bit about chapter 57, which was the second one I mentioned, in part because I wanted to maybe ask you a little bit about this idea of perhaps that Confucianism is much more, say, yang compared to a yin Taoism. And the idea, again, kind of going back to the Wu Wei, and I forget, you said Yahweh?
In Chinese, Yahweh.
Yo. So that to me sounds a bit like the kind of yin yang split, but again, thinking about the concept of it, it's this intermixing of these things, and kind of each of them being a part of the other, and having elements of the other. And so in chapter 57, let me get to that here in the book, down toward the bottom, or toward the end of this, and it says, "And so sages say, I do nothing, and the people transform themselves. I prefer stillness, and the people correct and regulate themselves. I engage in no activity, and the people prosper on their own. I am without desires, and the people simplify their own lives." To me, the chapter seems to be focusing a little bit on more or less whether we ought to be meddling, whether we ought to be organizing and ordering and structuring things. And the Taoist attitude seems to be, no, like, let everybody to themselves, and it'll work out okay.
Yeah, I think so. That's the correct understanding. Yeah. In between, in the middle part, the more taboos and prohibition, the more sharp implements the more clever people. So I think these are all what the Confucians are doing
Right.
to the eyes of Lao Tzu. Yeah.
And what would generally be the response? Like, I know earlier we were talking about the idea of it's not a divide between them, but there's kind of a both or a recognition of both. So
I think it's
yeah.
really a great point. And then, even I would say I agree with
Mhm.
the criticism because even in the even Confucian tradition, the
Mhm.
Confucianism, that we always try, we have a yes, let's say distinctive way, but well, that's the ideal way
Mhm.
we'd like to follow. I think that's very good criticism and like the really right criticism. So when I read it, and then yes, this as a Confucian, I would be cautious. This is
Mhm.
right criticism, and this is also what Confucians want to bear in
Mhm.
mind. Yeah,
Yeah.
because that's not what we want to do, want to
Right.
be. Yeah, yeah. So skillful, and then there's things if we go too far. So in Confucianism, the one of the very important the concept is the mean, the mean. So the mean, 中, actually, 中
Mhm.
is, in Chinese pronunciation, it means middle,
Mhm.
but it's not like the mathematical the middle, right? Like from it's number from 0 to 10 is number 5 or something.
Right.
It's not, yeah. So it's just the mean in general.
Mhm.
So I think the Confucians in really pursue to the way every time
Mhm.
what's the mean. So all these criticisms.
Mhm.
If we lose our attention, or we say sincerity, and
Mm.
then you can go off. Then this kind of problems can occur.
Interesting.
So that's what does it make sense? So that's why when I read it, oh, I can agree with that. This can be the danger we
Yeah.
can fall for.
What I like in particular and find interesting about what you're saying is like both of these, if you're just going back into the text and you're reading kind of what the ideals are of the Taoists or the Confucians based
Mhm.
on the two major texts,
Mhm.
um, and I think probably everybody recognizes that these are idealized things. Like this doesn't work in practice, regardless of kind of which side of the camp you're on.
Mhm.
Um, and you said there toward the end, the like if we lose our attention, if we kind of let things slip a little bit, we can sort of
Mhm.
fall off of that path,
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
thing that we're trying to do correctly or
Mhm.
rightly.
Mhm.
Um, and what I was really curious about, I guess, as a result is uh, maybe as within kind of the framework of a Confucian ideal, like what would that look like in practice? Like kind of recognizing that you're not getting to the ideal, but how do you pay attention? How do you keep your
Okay.
intentionality and the sincerity kind of going headed in the right area?
Okay, that's a great question, and it's very important. Um, I think one of the core issue, probably two, to explain more, to
Mm-hmm.
answer your question, is one is how you understand human nature,
Mm-hmm.
and then that's another relate. So human nature and self cultivation. So these two are very important. So for Confucians, I think in ancient China, we have two great Confucian scholars, Confucian philosophers.
Mm-hmm.
Since Confucius, there were Mencius
Mm-hmm.
and Sun Tzu. And I think these two Chinese philosophers offer great insight for this one to think about.
Mm-hmm.
So about human nature, Mencius idea is very influential, even until now for most of the Confucians, because He's famous with so-called that he believed that human nature is good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but the more important thing is, I think that he believed the human nature is good, but the human nature is the goodness of human nature. We are given as a sprout.
Okay.
So I think this the how do you say that it's like plants.
Mm-hmm.
So
You have to care for it.
you have to nurture. So I think that's one of the great things. So Confucians, we believe, because I think I'm one of them. So we believe that, so we believe that, yeah, we human beings are born with, you can think it's a kind of disposition or inclination. Uh, we like goodness. We
Mm-hmm.
are born with the goodness. And it's not seed. Seed and sprouts are different, right?
Mm-hmm.
So and then Misha said it's like a sprout. So most
Okay.
important thing is we need to really careful to nurture.
Mm-hmm.
So that's our view. We have the goodness as a sprout. Then that's number one.
Mm-hmm.
Then the process, the nurturing and then developing, that's self-cultivation. And because it's a plant, right? So the
Mm-hmm.
metaphor is like nurturing in the plant. So it never ends, basically,
Sure.
right? So you need to just keep nurturing. That's the process. So
Right.
for Confucians in general, that process is extremely important.
Mm-hmm.
And it never ends because let's say it's a perennial plant. So spring, summer, autumn, winter. When
Right.
next spring comes, maybe the environment changes,
Mm-hmm.
maybe
Yeah,
the
that's a good point.
climate changes too, probably, right? So it's never same. So
Mm-hmm.
there will be, it's never ending process of self-cultivation, you know. So that I think that's one two important concepts. And Sun Tzu, I will add one last thing, is Sun Tzu actually comes in here that he had a slightly different view about human nature, but he added a very important idea about ritual.
Mm-hmm.
And very simplistically speaking, that I think it's related to nurturing, that we can transform human nature. So we are born with
Okay.
it, and then through the process, and then how we really how do we say, how we set the environment and everything, we can make changes to this plant.
Sure.
Yeah, so all this and all the detailed process, or we call in general ritual, in Confucianism. So
Mm-hmm.
all is how you understand the human nature, then self-cultivation, and all process, you're never ending.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe for Taoist, like, oh my goodness, oh, you
Right.
just what would be your what would how would you react to that?
Yeah. So based on my reading of just really the Tao Te Ching and not much in the way of say commentary or anything like that, um, it sounds an awful lot like the Taoists would say, "Why are you bothering cultivating it? Like it'll grow on its own, and if it doesn't, then like that's just the way of nature. Like let it be." Um, it tends. It's weird because I feel like there is a similar idea of self cultivation. Um, that I have seen in people's like maybe more modern commentary, and that could just be that like these ideas are so mixed around together. But just from reading a lot of the passages in the Tao Te Ching, um, I think they would even question what the goodness is that the Confucians see in people, and they say that well, the goodness is our concept,
Mm,
um,
true.
and that like the more perhaps is the human nature is just what it is,
Mhm,
and it will be what it is regardless of whatever you do.
mhm,
And if you get in there and you try to mess with it, you're going to probably mess it up in the first place.
mhm.
Um,
Well, Yes, I think that's a great question. I mean, great criticism too. So I think it's very valid and
Yeah.
important criticism.
The big thing
And
that came to my mind as you were talking about that, maybe not as a criticism necessarily, but I think it's chapter 5. Specifically, it says like the great way is impartial,
mhm,
and by extension, then the sages are impartial.
mhm.
And so I would say that seems like the biggest difference there.
Yes, I understand. In general, in many cases, mostly, it's very difficult to have a clear idea what is good or bad.
Mm-hmm.
True. But also at the same time, in many cultures, for example, one of the great example of Mencius gives is, imagine that you see a baby
Mm-hmm.
crawling and then crawling and then go towards a well
Mm-hmm.
or a cliff, let's say. And you are singing it, oh no, baby is crawling and then approaching to the cliff. What would you do?
You probably run over and save it, right?
Yeah, but why?
Yeah, it's a good question because it feels like I have a couple thoughts. Like it feels like it would be just natural. Like you would want to go and save this thing when you see that they're in danger somehow. Like you want to jump in if you could. Um, and then another, just a totally different side of me is thinking about like biology and just the fact that like um, from a totally non like philosophical point of view, people would be like, oh, but that's like your genetics working. Like you've been trained over generations to save them. But yeah.
Yeah, but also the biology. I mean, there is another philosophical field. They are talking about that. Biologically, it's not also same. But biology also develops. Changes, right? So, in a sense, for us, that is a one thing that shows good example that humans and enlist. We share. There is some kind of underlying kind of feels, not always, but in most cases, that most human beings share this kind of the
Right, across
concern.
culture and everything. Right?
Yeah. So care for each other, care for another human beings, basically, right? So it's doesn't matter, as you mentioned about impartial, right? So I think that's just the same. So does Meisha says you are not going to save the kid, the baby, not because you have a connection, a close relationship with the parents, or you are looking for some kind of benefits, by saving the kid. No, it's just almost spontaneously. That's the word we use. Spontaneous comes out. That look, that is the sprout, the good sprout about human nature.
Yeah, it's interesting because I keep thinking a bit about and maybe this is why, like, going back to what you said earlier, that the story about like our ways are different and there's no way that we can really even collaborate, because I feel like the Taoists, the attitude is almost um like now it does kind of feel a bit incompatible, because the feeling or the sensation I get is like everything is good as it is, if we don't really get in there and mess with it. And so whatever knowledge you have, and if you try to act on that knowledge, like you're just going to be doing something different than you would have done without thinking. And so they really seem to be operating from a different general perspective of the world, and about the value of getting involved in a way.
Yes.
But yeah, it's interesting. I guess they sort of diverge in a little bit. It says something is wrong here, we're going to get in there and try to fix it, versus we're going to let it be and it'll fix itself. That's in.
I think it's my personal view recently. If you're interested in politics, I think it's similar, in a sense,
Yeah.
because and it's not really about who's wrong. It's just the difference, I think. And some people would say politics is just, oh, politicians are really bad, and the politics are really dirty, and then I don't want to get involved. Or they but also it's true, whatever happens in the politics, in the the Washington D.C. or in
Mhm.
the Congress, actually, most people, they live their life, and then the world just keeps going,
Mhm.
whatever happens. So I think in a sense we can understand
Yeah, for
what
sure.
Taoist would say, and I agree. And then I think that's also my political personal, my personal political view is all these the ordinary people who are just faithful and then live their own lives at the core probably.
Mhm.
But on the other hand, I have a personal belief that and many people believe that still we need politicians.
Mhm.
We need, yeah, we can discuss, we can disagree, how, to which point, but in very generally speaking, that we need politics
Mhm.
too, right? And then someone has to do something at least. And even though it's like you dirty your hands probably, but
Mhm.
we need some people who do the work too. And
Yeah.
I think very roughly I would say that Confucians are more closer maybe towards, and then they have a quite optimistic
Mhm.
view in doing such a thing, although there are some dangers, but someone has to do the work.
Right. Yeah, and that probably makes a fair amount of sense. Like, just from our conversation, I get a more general sense that the Confucians are like, look, I'm living in the real world.
Yeah.
We're dealing with these problems, and I have hope that we can do something about it so that it's at least a little bit better.
Mhm.
Um, and the Taoists are a little bit like, I'd separate myself from the world, kind of just go off and do my own thing, and let the rest of the world do its own thing, and whatever. Like everything's fine. Um, in that maybe a little bit more modern context,
Mhm.
you see oftentimes a lot of people will implement some kind of system, or a new technology or something like
Mhm.
that, often with very good intentions,
Mhm.
without necessarily being fully thought out, or
Mhm.
recognizing that these things can be manipulated or used in a different way. Um, and so I think, as far as criticisms go, that seems to be the kind of where a lot of the seat of the Taoist attitude of like, just stop.
Yeah.
Because
Mhm.
like anything you do is, you
Mhm.
might be trying to do good, but in doing so you're also introducing a new avenue for someone to not do good or to do something else.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I think I definitely agree with that. Yeah.
Well, this
I,
has been
yeah.
really fascinating. I think we got into a much better conversation just about this section here, and I don't think we really need to go on to that last little chapter, because we covered a lot of ground already on this. I really appreciated it, Wang. I wonder if you were open to other conversations, if other people wanted to
Sure.
try to get a hold of you, or check out your work, your scholarship, how do they find you? How do they get a hold of your stuff?
I think now I'm building my personal webpage, but it's still not yet ready. So, but still, I have my professional the pages.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're interested, you can just look up my name. Josh, you already put my name, right? So if you
Mm-hmm.
just Google my name, I think you can. It will lead you to my Phil people. That's the philosophers. That's the called the site. So I think you can find me there. And currently I am a postdoctoral fellow at Georgetown University. So you can also find my profile there. And if you
Mm-hmm.
are interested, you can reach me through that, institutional email too.
Excellent, great. Yeah, because we didn't really even get into some of the more specifics and nuances of your work, specifically in regarding
Mhm.
like kind of feminist Confucian philosophy.
Mhm.
So I think that may be ripe territory for a part two if we come back to it someday. But in the meantime, people can check it out themselves.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you a lot for being here with me tonight. I don't know. We'll carry on the conversation. We're coming back to this.
Yes, yes. I was a little bit nervous because, if I can say that, I really want to thank you, Josh, because I had a little concern because as a professional scholar,
Mm.
that I always footnote to myself whenever I talk. Right? Wait, what I mean by this, I make my
Mm.
own footnotes and brackets. But we have today, like always, our chat. I think we had a good inspirational chat. About philosophy. So thank you for giving me this chance. And inviting me to this great platform, and I really enjoyed. So if you want, I'll be happy to come back again.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much to my good friend Wang for helping me to lay bare my still very Western approach to understanding ideas. I came away from the conversation humbled by the caution and nuance that Wang brought about the differences and similarities between Confucians and Taoists. Perhaps we would do well to remember that the critiques our philosophical opponents have may indeed be warranted. In a world where we are quick to jump to separate into our tribes, it's the connections with the people outside our immediate circle that may be the most enriching. Now, I said there would be a few footnotes to this episode, so if you're interested in just a little bit more context, please continue listening. Otherwise, I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening. When we recorded this episode, Wang was working at Georgetown University, but has since accepted a position with Duke Kunshan University and will be relocating in the coming year to China. I'm so happy for her because she's been working so hard over the last couple of years for this exact opportunity. She'll be continuing her work there in China, and I'm really looking forward to maybe a decent excuse to get to go and travel. Earlier in the episode, you might have heard her say, "We believe," referring to Confucian philosophers. I loved having the chance to talk with her on this level because it shows that these philosophies are not dusty old theories on how the world works, but that people engage at a deep level with them and live out the tenets of those philosophies. The study of them is meant to advance our understanding and take us further down the path of cultivation. At one point in the show, Wang described a passage recorded by Xie Ji in which Lao Tzu and Confucius met. She later clarified privately that this passage is meant to give a kind of double meaning. She wished that I passed that clarification on to you. And the best translation for that passage would be, "Those who follow different paths cannot make plans together." This is meant to describe the idea that people with different fundamental values cannot work together, but also in a more literal sense that people on two separate paths cannot use the same map or itinerary. They're fundamentally moving in different directions with different stops along the way. That's all for this episode. Thank you again for listening if you've listened this far, and I'll see you next time. Music for this podcast is generously provided by Alexander Nakarada at www.serpentsoundstudios.com and is licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 license. Details in the description. If you'd like to come join the community, be a guest on the show someday yourself, you wish to support the podcast, or just get in touch, find me online at wanderontheway.org. And until next time, go have a good conversation.